Hello, we welcome you to the lesson today. We're studying Job chapter 19. Job chapter 19. So if you will, turn in your Bibles and let's begin. Verse 1. Then Job answered and said, before we look at the following passages, we see in chapter 19, round 2. There are two major sections in this chapter. First, Job sadly describes his sorry condition and situation in verses 1 to 22. And second, Job arises above the depths of his despair to the heights of his hope in verses 23 to 29. And we begin with verses 1 to 6, Job's complaint against his friends. In verse 1, we see that this is the beginning of Job's response here in chapter 19 for the second round. This is Job's sixth speech. How long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words? Bildad had reproached Job in Job 18, 1 to 4. And then Bildad described the end of the wicked in chapter 18, 5 to 21. Job questions Bildad and the friends. First, how long will you torment my soul? Second, how long will you break me? There is the sense of him being metaphorically broken in pieces or crushed by their words. The same word is also translated crush in Job 6 and verse 9. These 10 times you have reproached me. You are not ashamed that you have wronged me. Job says that they have reproached him often. Moreover, Job says that they were not ashamed at all, that they had wronged him with words. Job 19 and 2. More on this expression 10 times. These 10 times you have wronged me. The expression does not necessarily mean that Job's friends had reproached him literally 10 times, but that they had done so frequently. For example, consider the following instances. First, Jacob, who served Laban, complained that he had often changed his wages. And second, the Lord said that the people had often put him to the test. Genesis 31 and 7, the example of Jacob and Laban. Your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. Sure, he could have literally changed his wages 10 times. However, I think that he's using an expression here for often or frequently. And again, in Numbers 14 and 22, because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness have put me to the test these 10 times and have not heeded my voice. Again, yes, it could literally be 10 times. However, I think he's using an expression here to represent something that is often or frequent. And so Job says that they have reproached him 10 times. These 10 times you have reproached me, and so you have reproached me often. Verse 4. And if indeed I have erred, my error remains with me. Earlier, Job told his friends to tell him in what way he had sinned. However, they never told him. I guess it was easier to accuse him of something than actually point it out and specify what he had actually done. In Job 13:23, Job asked, how many are my iniquities and sins? Make me know my transgression and sin. Now, here in chapter 19 and 4, Job says that if he has indeed erred, my error remains with me, Job said. What did he mean? Some people explain that Job may have meant that his error is his concern and his concern alone, that this was not their business. However, he may simply mean that his friends did not know how he sinned. Again, Job 13 and 23. Nevertheless, Job did not admit that he had erred, that he had committed error or sin. Verse 5, if indeed you exalt yourselves against me and plead my disgrace against me, know then that God has wronged me and has surrounded me with his net. Job argues that his friends had no case against him, with no evidence of his sin. He would have to have them to know that if they raised themselves up against him, thinking that his suffering was due to his sin, pleading against him with his disgrace, that such was not the case. He said, know then that God has wronged me and has surrounded me with his net. Job says that his friends should know this, that God has wronged me. Job believes that he is innocent and that he is suffering undeservedly as if he was wicked. Both Job and Job's friends thought incorrectly that God had brought this suffering upon him. Job thought his suffering was undeserved. However, his friends, who thought he was ungodly, thought that his suffering was indeed deserved. Earlier, Job names God as his adversary. In Job 16:11, God has delivered me to the ungodly and turned me over to the hands of the wicked. In verses 7 to 12, Job describes what he thinks God has done, and Job attributes what has happened to him to God. Verse 7, if I cry out concerning wrong, I am not heard. If I cry aloud, there is no justice. Job complains that his cry concerning wrong is not heard. This term is also translated violence in Job 16 and 17. And so it's similar to saying violence, violence. He's crying out. There's violence. There's some wrong done against him. He cries out for help, that he has been wronged, but he says that he is not heard and that there is no justice. Again, we have to remember the great suffering and grief, the sorrow of Job. In verse 8, he has fenced up my way so that I cannot pass, and he has set darkness in my paths. Job complains that his cry concerning wrong is not heard. Verse 7. And now here in verse 8, Job says that God has fenced up his way. It is as though God has built a wall or walled up his way so that he cannot pass. God has set darkness in his path. And so it's as though God puts darkness in his paths or ways so that he cannot see or proceed to go on. Verse 9, he has stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head. Job says that God has stripped him of his glory. He has taken my glory away. This includes his wealth and honor. God has taken his crown, a metaphor for his honor. The scriptures speak often of the relationship between the crown and glory. For example, a crown of glory in Isaiah 62 and verse 3. Prior to his affliction, Job had an honorable reputation, but now he is reproached by his friends. His honor is removed and put in its place is shame. The man Job was said to be, in Job 1 and 3, the greatest of all the people of the East. And now he looks at himself as being stripped of his glory by God. The crown of glory taken from his head. Solomon in the book of Proverbs speaks of wisdom, and he admonished in Proverbs 4:8-9, exalt her, and she will promote you. She will bring you honor when you embrace her. She will place on your head an ornament of grace, a crown of glory she will deliver to you. Verse 10. He breaks me down on every side, and I am gone. My hope he has uprooted like a tree. Job says that God breaks him down on every side. It is as though he is a building and God has demolished him. He is gone. It is as though his hope is a tree and God has uprooted his hope like one might pull up a tree from the ground. And so we see a sad side of his hope, being like a tree uprooted. And of course, he thought he was going to die soon. Verse 11. He has also kindled his wrath against me, and he counts me as one of his enemies. Job thinks of God's wrath against him. He believes that God counts him as one of his enemies. He couldn't explain it any way else. Earlier, Job expressed how he thought that God counted him as an enemy. In Job 13:24, he said, why do you hide your face and regard me as your enemy? Speaking to God. And so Job looked at God too as if he was an adversary in Job 16:9. Job still believed and he had faith, but he couldn't account for why he was suffering. He believed himself innocent, and he thought, though wrong, that it was God that had brought this upon him. We know the true adversary from the beginning of the book of Job, Satan. Verse 12, Job continues, saying, his troops come together and build up their road against me. They encamp all around my tent. Job says that God's troops come together. His troops build up their road or way against Job. He feels as if he is under siege and surrounded. These troops may refer metaphorically to the terrors of God. In Job 6:4, he said, the terrors of God are arrayed against me. And so here he looks figuratively as if God's troops have built a siege ramp against him. Verses 13-20, we see Job's sorry condition. He has removed my brothers far from me, and my acquaintances are completely estranged from me. Job says that God has removed his brothers far from him. Oftentimes, this term, brethren or brothers, in the scriptures refers to fellow countrymen. Also, as in other passages in the book of Job, this term can refer to brothers in the sense of male siblings. Like in Job 1:13, Job 1:18, Job 42:11, and Job 42:15. In the second part of the passage, he says that his acquaintances are completely estranged from him. Job is alienated from his brothers and his acquaintances. They're no longer close. Later, there is reconciliation with his brothers, his sisters, and his acquaintances coming to him in Job 42:11. So here in this particular passage, he says that his brothers are far from him and his acquaintances are estranged from him. Now, in the next passage, he says, my relatives have failed and my close friends have forgotten me. Job speaks of the estrangement of his brothers and acquaintances in verse 13. However, it's not just his brethren and acquaintances, but his relatives who have failed him and his close friends who have forgotten him. And so while acquaintances may be simply people that you know, now he refers to his close friends, those who are very close to him, or at least were close to him. And while he talked about his brothers, perhaps brethren or maybe countrymen, his fellow countrymen, if not actual siblings, male siblings, now he says, my relatives have failed. And so we see the separation between him and everyone else. People that he knew and people that he knew very well. Verse 15, those who dwell in my house and my maidservants count me as a stranger, and I am an alien in their sight. People looked at Job as though they did not know him. And of course, given his dreadful physical condition, it's no wonder why some did not recognize him. So first, those who dwell in his house consider him a stranger. Who are those who dwell in his house? Well, Job apparently had showed sojourners hospitality, and they stayed in his house as guests. Second, Job had maidservants. These were female servants who looked at him as if he was a stranger, an alien in the sense of being a foreigner. Verse 16, I call my servant, but he gives no answer. I beg him with my mouth. What a sorry sight. Job calls his servant, but his servant does not answer him. Job has to beg, implore, or plead with his servant. Think of the disrespect and the humiliation of Job. Verse 17, my breath is offensive to my wife, and I am repulsive to the children of my own body. Job's acquaintances were estranged from him, verse 13. Now Job describes how he is a stranger even to his wife, his breath being offensive to him. He is also said to be repulsive to the children. Now, who are the children? Job says, the children of my own body. And as it stands in this text, these are the children of Job. However, we know that the children of Job are dead, and there is no indication in our text that he had other children. Perhaps Job thinks he is repulsive, not only offensive to his wife, but repulsive to the memory of his children who have passed. Maybe Job thought that if they were alive, his children would also be repulsed by him as is his wife. That's certainly possible too. The basic point here is with the children is the same as with his wife, that people were offended and repulsed by him and his condition. And they did not want to be near him. Verse 18, Job says that even the young children despise him. He said, even young children despise me. I arise and they speak against me. And so they looked upon the suffering man Job with contempt. When he arises, they talk or speak against him. Verse 19, all my close friends abhor me, and those who I love have turned against me. Job says that all of his close friends abhor him. Think about that. One thinks with sadness at the image of those who loved Job turning against him. When you lose your children, when you lose your possessions, when you lose servants, and when you lose even your health, what do you have? Job had his faith in God. And Job should have had the love of his close friends and family. But he did not. Think of the great temptation for Job to forsake the faith. But he did not. He maintained his integrity and he continued to believe with patience, to persevere. Even his close friends abhorring him. And those that Job loved turning against him. Verse 20. My bone clings to my skin and to my flesh, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. Job describes his bodily appearance and condition. He says that his bones clings to his skin and to his flesh. What does this mean? Well, this may mean that he had lost a little weight. We might describe someone who is very thin today with the English idiom, I am nothing but skin and bones. The second part of the passage reads, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. There is an English idiom today that originated with this very passage that says, by the skin of my teeth. The English idiom means barely or narrowly, or by a very thin margin. Perhaps Job is saying that he has narrowly or just barely escaped death. More likely, it's that he is close, very close to death. There was very little standing between him and the grave. Job was apparently thin, very thin, and emaciated. Verse 21 to 22, Job appeals to his friends. He's just described his sorry condition, his pitiful condition. And now in verses 21 to 22, Job appeals to his friends for pity. Verse 21, have pity on me, have pity on me, O you my friends, for the hand of God has struck me. Job pleads to his friends for pity. Given his great suffering, he asks for some sympathy, some sadness. In his desperation, he cries out to his friends to have mercy on him. He then says, God has struck me. Job's friends believed that God had struck him too. However, they believed that God struck Job because of his sins. And this is why they had forsaken him. They show him no pity. They thought that he was getting what he deserved. Earlier, Job said that kindness should be shown by his friend to him who is afflicted. However, they showed no such kindness. Now, at the beginning of the book, or the beginning of the discourses, the speeches, the friends were more tactful, a little more considerate. But as time goes on, they become more and more harsh towards Job. Job 6 and 14, Job simply wanted some kindness from his friends. He said, to him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. So if it's true that he had indeed, which he did not, forsake the fear of the Almighty God, his friend should have showed some kindness to him, Job says. Some pity, some mercy, but they did not. Verse 22, why do you persecute me as God does, and are not satisfied with my flesh? Job asked his friends why they persecute him. This same term is also translated pursue, Job 13:25 and Job 30 and verse 15. In the scriptures, we often read of persecution as a pursuit of people who are persecuted, being pursued, being chased. He says that God persecutes or pursues him, but asks why his friends pursue him. While God judges, they themselves act as judges toward him when they should have been friends and showed some kindness, some pity, some mercy. He also asks why they're not satisfied with his flesh. Look at all that had happened to Job and his flesh. He asked if they will ever get enough and if they will not be satisfied until he dies. Job 19:2-3, how long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times you have reproached me. You are not ashamed that you have wronged me. They should have been ashamed. Now, in verses 23-29, Job speaks of hope for the future. In this passage, we see the depths of Job's sorrow. But now, in verses 23-29, we see hope for the future. And ultimately, this is hope for everyone who follows the Lord. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book, that they were engraved on a rock with an iron pen and lead forever. Job gives a brief prelude in verses 23-24 of what he is about to say, which is of eternal significance for humanity. In verses 28-29, he follows up that passage with a word of warning of the judgment of God. Verse 23, here we see how Job desires that the words that he will speak in just a moment will continue to endure long after his death. I'm reminded of Peter in the New Testament, who, in his second epistle, wanted to leave a reminder to his brethren, even after his death, his departure, his exodus from this world, of his hope in the Lord. And so Job desires that the words that he's about to speak will continue long after his death. He wants his words to be written and inscribed in a book. If words are being handed down from people to people, that's one thing. But if you want to preserve words, do so in writing. He wants his words to be written and inscribed in a book. He said that they were engraved on a rock with an iron pen and lead forever. And so Job further expands upon his desire for his words to endure. First, engrave his words on a rock. Second, inscribe his words with an iron pen on lead. He desired for the word to endure forever. I will briefly comment now that his request was granted. We're reading the book of Job. God has preserved his words, the words of Job in the scriptures. They are a part of God's revelation. His word, which endures forever. 1 Peter 1, 22 to 25. Where Peter speaks concerning the word enduring, lasting, even though the flesh fades away like a flower, like the grass, the word of the Lord endures forever. Verse 25. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. Job professes confidence in the Redeemer. Even after Job dies, which he fully expected to die and to die soon, even after he has died and his body returns to the dust, he believes that he will be vindicated. He knows that his Redeemer lives and that his Redeemer will stand at last, in the end, on the earth. The word earth is literally dust. You might ask, who is the Redeemer? We might also ask, who else could it be other than God? Job saw his vindication coming in the last day, or at last. Who else could the Redeemer be other than God? In the New Testament, we learn that particularly the Son of God is our Redeemer. Just how much did Job know? Well, in the New Testament, Luke 1 and 68, blessed is the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited and redeemed his people. Again, speaking of the Son of God. And in Ephesians 1 and 7, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sin, according to the riches of his grace. Job professes confidence in the Redeemer. The Redeemer, he says, lives and will continue to live long after his death. And his Redeemer will stand at last, he said, on the earth. Verse 26. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. Job speaks of the hope of seeing God after his death. He will be vindicated. According to the text, he will see God in his flesh. This flesh is not his old skin, which would have been destroyed, his mortal body, but his new body. This is a description of the resurrection of the body in the resurrection. Verse 27. Whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. How my heart yearns within me. Job knows that he will see God for himself. He will see God with his own eyes. He will not see God in his mortal body, but in an immortal, resurrected body in the last day. He yearns for that day. Don't we all? All who trust in God yearn for that day, the day of the coming of the Lord, the resurrection and the judgment. We yearn for that day. Job went through a great deal of suffering, grief, and sorrow. But here in verses 23 to 29, we see hope for the future. How my heart yearns within me. Verse 28 to 29. If you should say, how shall we persecute him, since the root of the matter is found in me? Be afraid of the sword for yourselves, for wrath brings the punishment of the sword, that you may know there is a judgment. Here he concludes by warning his friends of the judgment of God. Job warns his friends, if they continue to persecute him, saying that the cause of his suffering was his own sin, they were in danger. Verse 29, last verse of the chapter. Job says that they should be afraid of themselves, for themselves, of the judgment of God, the sword of judgment. He said, be afraid of the sword for yourselves, not for me. Job believed he was innocent and he would be vindicated. Be afraid of the sword for yourselves, friends. For the wrath brings the punishment of the sword. That is the wrath of God. He said that you may know there is a judgment. He said here that the wrath of God would come upon them. What a chapter. What an amazing chapter. Particularly the passages describing the hope for the future. We hope that this lesson has been helpful for you in better understanding this chapter of Job. We encourage you to continue to study. There's always more to learn, and we hope that you will continue your studies with us. Lord willing, we'll be back again to continue with the great book of Job. Thank you for being here today.